What's up, guys? Today I'm going to do a video on these pens right here. These are the Kaweco Sport series of pens. This model of pen comes in a multitude of color. I believe they have the Sport Ice, which is basically all clear body with a color section and a demonstrator clear colored cap. This is one of the originals. This is actually an older version, I believe. It has a silver trim nib, and it also has a much more bulbous feed versus, I believe, I've had this for a few years. This I just got recently. This has, if you look at the nib, it's actually gold plated, and the nib is actually a lot flat. The feed is actually more flat, and it doesn't really have fins, so I believe that's like an older version of it. You can see this is just the packaging that it came in. It's just a very small, simple box. And inside it comes with a cellophane wrap and a international cartridge. I believe this is a short international cartridge. But I'm not entirely sure. No, this might be a standard international cartridge. And then they make like a longer version of the international cartridge. And that's one of the biggest things about this pen that either people like or hate, is that because it's such a small pen, and that's basically what I classify this pen as. It's like a small pocket pen. It's perfect to carry every day in your pocket or purse or bag or whatever as a backup pen. It's made out of plastic. They do have an aluminum model which costs around like $70, $80, and I believe they also have like really nice acrylic models for in like $100+ range. And I think they also have like carbon fiber ones in like the $100 range. These are the cheaper lines, the sport models. They come in plastic. They're very durable. Like I said, I've carried this in my pocket for several years with no issues. Never had any leaks or cracks or anything. You can see that when it's capped, it actually covers up a lot of the pen. But one of the big things about this pen is that because the body is so short, there's no converter that really fits in there. I believe there's a Monteverde mini converter. Is that the one? Yeah, it's the Monteverde mini converter will kind of fit in here. Not really, because what happens is that it's like a slide converter, and when you screw the pen back, it'll actually slide the converter down a little bit more, and you'll get a few drops of ink that comes out. Your other option is to basically use international cartridges and refill those, like I used to do with this pen. And the third option is basically eyedropper fill, which I have done here with this complete clear demonstrator. So if my most recommended way of doing it, if you don't want to really deal with refilling cartridges with an ink syringe, not that there's anything wrong with it, I did this for several years with this pen, is to go in eyedropper mode. When you do eyedropper, you get, I believe it carries around 2.5 milliliters of ink, so you can write with it for a very long period of time. Granted, you should kind of look into the positives and negatives of an eyedropper pen. I'm not gonna really go into it now, but you can have some issues of like the pen burping out ink and stuff, especially once the air bubble in there gets a little larger. But at the same time, I understand the positives and negatives, so I chose to carry this as an eyedropper. I think it looks cool as a demonstrator. These pens are cheap. You can get them around $25, which is in the Lamy Safari range, but they're very small. I think outside of this pen, like a standard, Kaweco makes like the Lilliput, I think, which is like a much smaller metal pen, but it's kind of too small to carry and write with comfortably for an extended period of time. At least for me, this is kind of the smallest level of pen that I can carry with me and still write with it for an extended period of time. I'll compare it to like a benchmark pen that I use, my Pelikan M600. You can see it's around an inch shorter capped, and if I were to uncap, actually. This has no ink in it, so it won't dry out. I'll use this. The uncap length, you can see, still significantly shorter. But the key thing with this pen is that if you use it posted, it basically brings the pen length to that which is like longer than the Pelikan M600, which I use this as a standard pen unposted. So for me, in this size, especially with this diameter, it's not as thin as the Lilliput is, so I can actually write with this pen for an extended period of time with no problems if I have it capped. My hands are small enough where I can still write with it uncapped. It's not very comfortable. I feel it's a little too lightweight like this, so I actually prefer a cap for this pen. It's one of the rare pens I actually prefer capped. I'll go ahead and kind of compare it to some other mini pens that I have. Here I have a Pilot Pura. You can see here, capped. It's slightly longer than the Kaweco Sport. If you go uncapped, also again, just slightly longer than the Kaweco Sport. This pen, I also use this pen capped as well, just because it's kind of getting on the edge of not being able to use it unposted. And then finally, the last pen I'll compare it to is the TWSBI Mini. Now this pen is very popular because it is a very small pen. If you compare it to like the M600, it's like a good like half-inch shorter when it's capped. And this pen is nice. Like, you don't really deal with the issues that you have with the Kaweco Sport because it is the piston fill pen. That's also why it's this length, because obviously to make it piston filled, you need a certain level of length in order to fit the entire piston mechanism in while still having a decent ink capacity. And I had used this TWSBI Mini as a pocket pen, like a pocket backup pen, for around a month every day, and I had no issues with it, I guess. One thing is that unscrewing it and in order to use it posted, you have to like screw it back there. I don't really like that. I know some people liked the fact that it's posted by screwing it on. I feel like it takes a little too much time. I actually prefer the Kaweco Sports. Granted, you have to unscrew it to open it, but at the same time, it poses very deeply. You can see how much of the pen, it's like 1.5 inches of the pen is within the cap when you post it. It's very quick, and then you can get to writing very quickly. And because the cap is so light, it isn't really back heavy, versus with the TWSBI Mini, I feel like it's a little bit back heavy when you use it posted. TWSBI does have a TWSBI does have a reputation of having the plastic crack, which is why maybe I wouldn't really necessarily suggest this as a pocket pen. If you keep it in the pocket, the last thing you want is to have it crack if you lean against it and have ink spill all over the place or whatever. It's great for a shirt pocket because of the shorter size. It can fit into most shirt pockets with no issues without like having it poke out too much because the bottom of the pen is hitting the bottom of the pocket. This pen I carried in my front pants pocket, no problem. I've leaned against it. I used to play pool a lot, and you're always leaning against the table with your front pockets, and it's always put pressure on there. I've never had any problems with it cracking. When I go backpacking or whatnot, even though I probably don't really need a fountain pen when I go backpacking, I still like to bring one because I feel weird not having one on my person. This is the pen I bring, and this will start being the pen I bring because it's basically, I won't call it bulletproof, but it's pretty tanky. The reason why I never really use this all that much is because I didn't buy this, my friend gave this to me, and it came with a medium nib, which unfortunately was a little difficult to write with on cheaper papers, which is kind of what you need a backup pen for most of the time. Right now, I got this pen solely with a fine nib, solely to use with like my signature ink of Noodler's 54th Massachusetts. It was my everyday carry ink. It's a bulletproof ink, which is nice for signing checks or writing out checks and whatnot, or when I'm doing work stuff and I need to put my signature down on something as a manager, and I would prefer to have the ink be relatively long-lasting and water-resistant. But I don't necessarily always want to use just bulletproof inks in my main pens, so then it's nice to have this backup pen where I could just quickly sign something, and for daily writing purposes I can use a non-bulletproof ink or non-water resistant ink, but in a nicer color or whatever in my main pen. Also for $24, honestly, or like $24, $25, I honestly feel it would make a good single ink pen, for an ink like Noodler's Bay State Blue or any of the Bay State line or their Eternal lines or whatever, where Nathan Tarlev highly suggests you not mix the Bay State colors with any other inks, because what'll happen is they'll react with each other, and people have mixed Bay State Blue with other inks and they've gotten sludge to form. The last thing you want is sludge forming in your pen, especially in your feed. And with Bay State Blue, you know, most people will buy one pen and dedicate that pen just for Bay State Blue. Other people, you know, you can clean the pen out really well and still use it with a different ink, but you definitely want to like bleach, like if stuff stains, if you get a demonstrator, it'll stain the plastic. If you want to clear all of that out, you'll have to bleach the pen. And the nice thing about these Kaweco Sports is that they're very easy to maintain. There are very few parts to this pen, and they're all plastic. You know, you have the cap, you have the body here, and then these you can just soak in like it's a very diluted bleach solution to clear out any ink from there, and then you can put Bay State Blue back in there and not worried about inks mixing. At the same time, you know, in general, when you have a pen that has a nib and feed unit that's very difficult to flush out, you may not want to necessarily mix inks in that, because if it reacts with remnants of ink inside the feed, you'll get sludge formed in there or whatever will happen, and you won't be able to get the right pen to write or flow well. With these Kaweco Sports, they're very easy. They're friction fit in there. I like to just grip it and rotate it as I pull out. There we go. Generally you want to just pull out straight out, but I feel like twisting it helps loosen it up a little bit. And then basically you have the nib and feed here. There is kind of like a notch cut out in the nib and feed section. Probably get it in focus for you to see. So it's very, very easy to reassemble because it's notched. The nib is notched into the feed. You don't have to like kind of fiddle around with it and make sure that the shoulder alignment with the feed is good to get good flow. And you know, these are the parts of the pen right here: nib, feed, section, body, and cap. You can throw all of this into a diluted bleach solution, rinse it off with clean water, and you have basically a completely pristine clean pen that you can proceed to fill with whatever color you want. You know, this pen I never used as an eyedropper. I always used with an ink syringe and an old standard international cartridge. With this eyedropper pen, basically with this amount of ink in here, it'll take me several months before I actually use up the ink in this pen. And what I'll basically do is I have a silicone grease here at the threads between the section and the body. Once this pen runs out of ink, I'm not going to just refill it because I feel it gets a little messy. The silicone grease will kind of take on the color of the ink. What I would do is I would just completely clean the pen out, take off all remnants of the old silicone grease, and then choose whatever next color I'm going to fill into the pen, and then reapply silicone grease and whatnot, and have a very nice clean looking pen. So these pens, highly recommended. You know, obviously if you get the aluminum version, you won't be able to use it as an eyedropper because it's raw metal exposed to the ink. But if you don't mind, reusing ink cartridges, or actually even Kaweco actually came out with like an aerometric squeeze converter for this pen. But from the reviews I've heard, like first of all, they're very difficult to find. They're not really imported to several retailers, at least in the US. But from what I've heard, they actually don't hold a lot of ink. They actually hold less ink than the international cartridge. So I feel like other than ease of filling the pen on the go, you're probably better off just using an ink syringe or just eyedroppering it like I did with this clear demo one. So that's my recommendation. For a $25 pen, you can't go wrong. You can always have a backup pen with you in like a nice, good, solid, bulletproof color. You don't have to worry about maintenance. Honestly, the nib writes quite well. The medium nib especially wrote really well. Even the fine nib, I didn't really have to do any nib alignment or nib smoothing actually. I had to realign the tines a little bit, but that's just because I'm picky that way. But I didn't really have to smooth out the nib all that much. Granted, it's not super buttery smooth, but as a backup pen, I don't really need a pen to write very smooth, and at the same time it wrote smooth enough that it didn't really bother me to write with the pen for an extended period of time either. So hope you guys enjoyed this video, and